A good pair of football boots shouldn't cost a fortune, and that's something that New Balance realized with the 442 V2 Pro. I just got these boots a couple of weeks ago and I've really been enjoying testing them out. So in this review, we're going to be covering all of the features of the New Balance 442 V2 Pro, including the design, the build quality, and the playability. I'll also be discussing how they compare with similar football boots that are currently available on the market as well. If you are interested in picking up a pair of these boots, I'll leave a link to the Upper 90 website where you can find them at a discount. Now, let's get into the review. So to kick things off, let's talk about the design of the New Balance 442s. So the first thing you're gonna notice when picking up these boots is that they have a full kangaroo leather upper that's really soft to the touch. Now this kangaroo leather does run all the way from the toe box through the midfoot to the heel of the boot, and the only exceptions that you'll find with a different material are the New Balance logo that's on both the inside and outside of the boot. On the outside of the foot, you have a New Balance logo that has a plastic material that's ridged for a little bit more texture. And then on the inside of the foot, there's an actual leather embossed New Balance logo as well. And then the only other non-leather part of the upper here is gonna be this traditional lacing system where you have a synthetic tongue here that's really thin and elastic. Upon initial impressions, I thought that the tongue was a little bit flimsy, but after wearing the boots, I got a better impression, and I'll discuss that later. Continuing on with the design at the back of the boot, you have 3 added heel liners, 1 directly at the back of the heel, and then 2 on either side of the boots. And then inside of the boot, you're gonna have a really thin foam insole as well. Moving on to the base of the football boot, you have a sole plate here that I think is actually one of the New Balance 442's best features. Now, upon looking at this sole plate, it seems really simple. It's just 11 short conical studs on what looks like a pretty simple one-piece frame, but this is actually a surprisingly light sole plate that actually makes it lighter than almost any other leather football boot that's currently available. It's also very rigid as well. The only part that kind of bends is towards the toe box here, but through the heel and the midfoot, it's extremely rigid and really hard to bend, and that really translates into a snappy feeling when running on the field. So I think this is an instance where looks can be kind of deceiving. It looks like a really traditional, simple, and not well thought out sole plate, but I think this is one of the areas of the football boot that New Balance executed on the best. So now that we've talked about the design of the 442s, let's move on to the build quality. So overall, the build quality was an aspect I was definitely really impressed with taking these out of the box. The first thing you're gonna notice is, as I mentioned, just that soft kangaroo leather. It's stitched together really meticulously near the toe box here. It reminds me of a boot that's kind of similar to the Copa Mundial, but I'd say the stitching here is even a little bit more detailed than what you would find on the Copas, and I think it actually edges them just a little bit in that area. Overall, the construction of the entire upper just feels really premium, and there's no part that feels cheap whatsoever. And although it's a pretty small detail, I actually really like the laces that these shipped with as well. They feel pretty modern and premium, and through the lacing system, they're actually thinner than they are at the top here. So when you're tying your laces, you get a little bit more material here, and it's easier to kind of just tie them as you would normally. But through that central lacing system, they're thinner, and that's probably gonna also just make them a little bit more minimal on feet and provide a cleaner surface as well for striking the ball. And then the sole plate, as I mentioned, this feels really quality as well. That's one complaint I had with the Nike Premier 3. I felt that the sole plate, although it was really simple and fairly well executed, it didn't feel the most rigid, as in you could bend it pretty easily. This sole plate on the 442, it's really light, really rigid, and just has that great amount of snappiness. Only time will tell as far as if there's gonna be any sole separation between the upper and the sole plate. But overall, I'm really happy with the construction of this sole plate. As I mentioned, I think it's one of the best things about the boot. If I could mention maybe only one thing I could change about the build quality, it would probably be near the heel here, especially towards the inside. I think it's pretty soft towards the top, which is nice, but as you get closer to the heel counters here, it gets a little bit more rigid, and I don't like that transition between the soft heel and then the rigid heel, because occasionally that could lead to blisters. So I think they could have done maybe a little bit more padding here to get a little more softness on the heel, but overall, the build quality is really great. All right, now moving on to the more fun part, let's get into the playability of these football boots. So when I was on the field, I noticed these boots slip on really easily, but honestly, with a leather football boot that has a traditional open lacing system like this, you're gonna find that they're really comfortable just to take on and off. But one thing I noticed was a pretty dramatic difference between this and other leather football boots I've used is the weight. I actually had my Nike Premier 3s and my Copa Mundials in my bag with me, and you could tell just by comparing them against each other leather, the weight difference is pretty significant, which I still find pretty crazy because just by looking at these football boots, I don't think you would think that they're gonna be a light pair. Just because the upper seems pretty padded and it seems like there's a lot of thick kangaroo leather here, but I really think that sole plate tooling delivers a lot of weight savings. Then after I put on the boots, I did notice that they have a nice roomy toe box. This is something that's pretty consistent with all New Balance football boots. I find them to be a little bit wider than anything from competing brands. So overall, I felt that I had a lot of space to move my feet around once I had the boots on. And another important thing to note there, I actually got these specific football boots in the wide variation, which just gives a little bit of extra room in the upper here towards the toe box. So if you do have wide feet, that's an option you have. If you get any New Balance football boot, they do offer wide variation. Then moving on, as I laced up the boots, I noticed I got a great amount of lockdown. As I mentioned, I think these are great laces, and the tongue here, although it's really thin, I think it actually works to the benefit of these football boots, because as you wrap the laces tighter and tighter, the tongue kind of squeezes and wraps around your foot. And I think that if it was too bulky, it would be a little bit less sensitive and it wouldn't give you quite the same sensation of lockdown. So I really like how as you pull the laces tighter, the tongue kind of just like adds to that sensation of lockdown. Then once I had the boots on, I just did a little bit of a light warm up with some dribbling and then got some light touches on the ball with some juggling exercises. And the first touch on these just felt so nice. I think there's a decent amount of leather on these boots, which if you like leather football boots, I'd say it's kind of an acquired taste because the first touch is pretty pillowy and soft. So when you're juggling, it's not gonna be a barefoot feel like you'd get with a Mercurial or a Puma Ultra, but you still get a good sensation of the ball. It just feels really comfortable when juggling, dribbling, passing, or shooting. And just moving around, as I mentioned, I felt really free. I felt like there was enough space for my toes, which as a wide-footed player is sometimes difficult when I'm trying on new boots. Sometimes they can tend to pinch towards the big toe area, but overall, these just felt really great to move around in. And then after doing some juggling drills, I moved on to shooting. This was kind of tough on the day because the field I was at only had 6-foot-tall goals, so I was constantly skying the ball over. I tried to not include any of that footage in there, so I tried to also keep the ball as low as possible when I was shooting. But these felt great to shoot in. You get that same kind of pillowy first touch that I was talking about earlier, and you also get a little bit of traction on the ball as well. Obviously, there's not a lot of grippy elements on these football boots, but I find that any leather football boot, they're not too slick when you're striking the ball. So I felt like I was able to get a little bit of spin when I needed to. When I had to get under the ball to chip it, I felt like the boots were perfectly capable of doing that. Didn't notice any slipping sensation on the ball. And now I've talked about a lot of the things I liked when I was playing in these boots. Just moving on to a few cons that I've had. I did notice, as I mentioned, just a little bit of pressure around the heel area. Now this is something that typically goes away after a few sessions, so I'll try and report back later. But that'd be the only thing I would note is these probably take just a couple sessions to fully break in, just getting used to the heel as well as the leather forming around your feet. Now moving on, let's talk about how the 442 compares to other leather football boots that are in this same category. Now as I mentioned, I think the most important difference to point out off the bat is that the 442, when compared to the Nike Premier 3, the Tiempo Legend 9, as well as the Adidas Copa Mundial, it is noticeably lighter, and that really comes through when you're wearing these boots on feet. They just feel a lot snappier and aggressive, and I think that's also due to the more rigid sole plate tooling as well. Then moving on to some other differences, compared to any leather football boot that you can get from Nike, as well as I would also say the Copa Mundial as well, I feel that the leather upper here is a little bit thicker, a little bit more pillowy. So if you like that sensation of leather on your feet when you're dribbling or passing the ball, I think that sensation is going to be amplified with the 442s. And then regarding comfort, I'd say it's almost a maybe 1-to-1 comparison towards the Copa Mundial and the Nike Premier 3. So if you felt comfortable in those football boots, you like the sensation of leather, a traditional lacing system, things like that, then you're gonna find these boots really comfortable as well. And then as far as how the actual leather on these football boots compares to other models, I would say the kangaroo leather used here in the 442s compares most closely with the Mizuno Morelia Made in Japan Neo 3. And if you know that football boot, it costs about $300, whereas this boot comes in at around $130. So essentially what I'm trying to say by that is that the leather here feels really, really premium. I wouldn't be surprised if a football boot of this build quality was at around a $200 or greater price point. And then as far as comparisons go, the final note I'll say is that this does have a pretty wide sole plate and base compared to other football boots, especially other leather football boots. So if you find Nike models to be a little bit too narrow, I would definitely recommend checking out the 442. And finally, the last point I'm going to be covering is the value of these boots. So ultimately, I think the 442 Pros offer a ton of bang for your buck. As I said, I think you're getting Mizuno quality football boots for just $130. They feel like they could be priced at a much higher premium, but I think that because they're from a brand like New Balance, you're getting a really great deal. And overall, I think it's one of the best budget football boots that's currently on the market. So if you've gotten the chance to try out the 442 V2 Pros, let me know what you think of them. Let me know the things that you do like and some of the things that you didn't. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.